Scandinavian Bob here, hi. So yesterday I was reading an article written by Anna Lembke, an addiction expert who is professor of psychiatry at Stanford University. And for those of you who have been following me for a while, I want you to stay with me here and see if you recognize anything she is talking about in the article. She starts off by saying that despite the fact that we are now living in a time where we have more luxuries and seemingly a much better life than ever before in history, we are also more depressed, more anxious, and have more chronic pain than ever before. The article then speculates a bit on possible causes, but none of them sounds convincing to her until she comes to the last one, which is something she calls the plenty paradox. And she says, quote, abundance itself has become the source of our suffering, unquote. Now, before I come to the most important part here, some of you may be thinking, I see where you are going with this, Bob. But how can the modern world cause more chronic pain? Well, later on in the article, she also talks about the pain and pleasure balance and how scientists have found that pain and pleasure are actually co-located in the brain. Another way to put this is that in the brain, they are two sides of the same coin. And if you push hard and long enough on the pleasure side, you get pain as a counter reaction, physical pain or depression or anxiety or lack of motivation and drive. Which, if you think about it, they are all painful. Anxiety, for example, is mental pain. In fact, it can be very painful. This pain and pleasure counter mechanism is something I talk a lot about in my dopamine fasting course in the module where we go into detail about Richard Solomon's opponent process graph, by the way. Now, in the article, Anna also says, quote, wired for scarcity and a world of ever-present danger, the human brain is woefully mismatched for this world of dopamine overload, in which almost every human activity has become drugified in some way. More and more reinforcing, more accessible, more potent, more novel, and nearly infinite in quantity. Unquote. She then goes on to explain how all these modern world stimuli are making it so that we keep pushing so hard and frequently on the pleasure side that the counter mechanism, which is the pain side, becomes so strong and long-lasting that the result is paradoxically a life with more pain, anxiety, and depression. Well, that's the paradox here, my friends. If you chase too much pleasure for pleasure itself, you actually end up in a state where you are incapable of feeling pleasure, joy, or happiness. Oh man, what a paradox. But it is 100% true. So now you may be asking, so does porn addiction push the pain and pleasure balance? Well, I can personally tell you, yes, 100%. You can bet your bottom dollar it does. In fact, that is the worst thing you can be doing online. It's even worse than social media addiction. Much worse. And so what's the solution to all of this then? Well, this, my friends, is where dopamine fasting comes to the rescue. By removing excess cheap dopamine for a long enough time, the pain and pleasure balance will reset and you can once again start feeling great. And depending on the individual and how numb your reward system is, this can take anywhere from about 48 hours to 2 to 3 months, and for some even longer. But that's more people with severe addictions, of course. Yeah, so dopamine fasting is an amazing tool I believe everyone should have in their toolbox in today's modern world. In fact, here's a quote from the article where Anna says, quote, 20 years ago, the first thing I would have done for a patient with anxiety or depression was prescribing an antidepressant or recommend psychotherapy. Today, I'm more likely to suggest a dopamine fast. About 80% of my patients feel better with this intervention alone, consistent with the idea that consumption of high-reward substances and behaviors feels good in the short term but contributes to depression and anxiety in the long term. Unquote. Yeah, so these are the things I've been talking about for the last 4 years on my channel now. And this, my friends, is the very reason for why I created my online dopamine focus fasting course. Because I know that in terms of all the self-improvement stuff you can do, this is what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. I just recently launched it and I'm so incredibly happy to see the results people are already getting. If you are interested in checking it out, I can leave a link to it under the video. And if you're not, then for God's sake, at least cut out or drastically reduce your consumption of online porn. But for most people, even that won't get them to the highest level, which again is the very reason for why I created that dopamine fasting course. And oh hey guys, by being a dopamine focused warrior, you are truly walking an amazing journey. Dopamine is the secret to life. It's both mysterious and precious. And just as long as we keep focusing it on the right stuff, we have wonderful things to come for sure. So keep it locked into Dopamine Focused Warriors.